Hello, everybody. My name is Jake, and I am joined by the wonderful, illustrious Jolie.
Hello.
And we are back for season 2 of the seriously life and business podcast. I'm pretty sure I said that in episode 1 exactly like that too.
Okay.
Because I say business and then it's life and business. I'm like, oh, I meant. Either way, we are back for season 2. And after season 1's pretty good performance, I would say I think it did very well.
Mm-hmm.
Did a lot better than we thought it would do.
Mm-hmm.
At least the team did. And we figured we'd start this episode and or start this new season with an episode answering questions from our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
We had our social media lead at Faux Productions send out a little poll to listeners, and we got a lot of good questions. I think we got about 30 questions, and we've slimmed it down to what we think are the most relevant questions, the most on the point questions. And for those who didn't see that poll, Jolie, you have an announcement to make, technically.
Yes, I've retired professionally.
Professionally retired.
That's correct. I think our last podcast was maybe May.
Our last podcast uploaded was May.
May. And it was always my dream to retire at 55.
Mm-hmm.
I just turned 55. But I don't know that in May I really knew that it was going to happen. I think some things happened late summer, early fall, that kind of solidified it for me. And I just officially am retired now right around the 1st of January. So great. Long notice. That's always the case in situations like this.
It
But
always,
I'm
yeah.
looking forward to retirement and having a grand time.
It's fantastic. Well, and that's why I said for our poll non-viewers, because we actually mentioned that in the poll.
Oh, okay. I
So
gotcha.
that's where some of the questions came from.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to use this episode to kind of answer some of those questions. So what did we not cover in season 1 that people really want to know about before we get into kind of the more story-driven season 2, right? Because apparently a lot of people loved stories from the workplace.
Oh, there's
r/ask
so many stories.
HR. We have so many interesting more stories to tell,
Oh.
things of that nature. Maybe we'll get the coveted Jake rants about education episode this season.
I think every HR person who has spent their career in that space could write a book.
Oh, for
So
sure.
there are so many stories. And I have stories that aren't mine that I could share too,
All right.
that I've heard from others.
Well, let's go ahead and get into our great questions. We slimmed it down to 6. Will we get to all 6? I'm not sure. But I'm going to ask them in the order I think would be the most interesting. And I think we start with a pretty straightforward one. I think we start with question 1 on our list, which is, what is one lesson that stayed true throughout your entire career? And I think this was asked, because this question was slimmed down by our social media lead because it was like a super elongated question. I think the longer version basically was asking, were you ever taught by anything by a mentor or learned something from a professional peer that was consistently useful, that at first maybe even you didn't know if it was useful or not, but showed true, over time and realistically kept coming back as like yeah, that was a really good lesson to learn. And even if it's like an educator taught you or something,
Well,
but something in that vein.
That's different than how I read the question than originally.
That may have just been the slimming down.
Okay, so
but how did you read it originally?
I read it as, what is the lesson that I've learned? What's the one lesson that I learned that stayed true and I continued to try to instill in others?
Sure, let's maybe we answer a little bit of both. Let's answer your version first.
So, I think the biggest lesson that I took from a mentor, and I think I changed it a little bit the way he said it, is he always said, it's better to be consistently wrong than to be inconsistent. And I would change that a little bit. This is very different than my own lesson learned. But what I would say is, and I actually just had this conversation a few weeks ago with a colleague, people come to HR for consistency, that we consistently administer the policies. And consistency is more important than fairness, because what may be fair to one person because of their circumstances or unique situation may not be fair to another person. And so, the policies are the policies, and we have to administer the policies of the organization consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I use it with leaders when I say your your team needs to be able to predict how you're going to respond. So you need to be consistent. What's a big deal and what's not a big deal? It's very stressful. And I've had leaders that I felt this way with. Something happens and you don't know how they're going to respond. Are they going to, my gosh, call for your job and want to fire you over it? Or is it going to be one of these, okay, well, let's fix it and move on? And the best leaders that I had, I could learn to predict how they were going to respond to something unusual pretty quickly because they were consistent. Somebody making a mistake was pretty much consistently dealt with in the same way. Somebody doing something nefarious was never tolerated. When you have a leader who lets some things slide and doesn't let other things slide, it gets really hard to know what to react to yourself. So I think that's probably the biggest mentor lesson that I had, that consistency is really critical. And I think it's true even in your personal life with your family and with your kids. Um, People need to know that you're going to be kind of the same way under the same circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the biggest lesson that I learned is a little bit different than that, although that was very important and I think I used it every day. My biggest lesson learned, and it probably comes from all the crazy stories that I share or have shared or will share in the future. I think it's very important to realize that even good employees, good colleagues, good people in the right circumstances can do bad things. And I think for me, especially since I seem to have spent so much time doing investigations and digging into why somebody did something or who did it or what happened, I think it's really important to always keep that in mind and try to separate the person from what happened. And I think that is the human element. So many times somebody did something really egregious and they can no longer work here, but they are still a human being. They still deserve some empathy. They need to go home and, tell their family what happened or not. In many cases, I'm sure they don't tell the truth, but they're still a person. And the best of people, the best of employees can behave in the worst ways under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that everybody deserves to have a fresh start. Now, that doesn't always mean that what you did can be forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people have done things that just can't be tolerated in the workplace, but they should also look at it as a learning opportunity to say, okay, I screwed up. I'm never going to make that mistake again. And then you need to dissect what were the sequence of events that led you to those decisions. And I think that's my biggest learning is don't discount the person because they did something or were involved in something or behaved in some way poorly. Um, and I think that percolates, that's the severe piece. But even like giving feedback, I had somebody on my team say to me the other day, a few months ago now, but basically what they said is they really appreciated it when something happened. I addressed it with them. I said, hey, this happened. This is not okay. Um, and then we moved on. And I didn't remind them of it constantly. I didn't bring it up constantly. I may have mentioned it in passing in their review at the end of the year, but it's like once we addressed it, it was done. Um, it's not one of those things that's like I'm going to continually hold that against you. And I think that's really part of that empathy piece of people sometimes make a poor decision. I get a motive too, but taking a step back, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so ago, maybe a year ago, I had somebody kind of confront me and say, you had this sequence of events, Jolene, or this fact pattern that somebody gave you, and you tested and you listened and you asked me a few questions, and I think I stumbled in my responses, and so you came out with X. And I accepted X, but as I've kind of gone back, I realized maybe I didn't give you the rest of the story because I didn't feel like I could. I felt like you were asking me questions that led me down a different path, and now I feel like I need to come back and say something. And so I was like, well, absolutely, you need to. If I didn't give you that opportunity or if I didn't ask you the right questions. Now, at the end of the day, the person still messed up. But I think sometimes that's hard. And even as a leader, you have to accept the fact that, I may have gone down a particular path because I made an assumption. And I think that's always the big thing. Let's not assume malicious intent. Let's not assume some nefarious, agenda. And let's not assume that they're a bad person. They could be a very good person and they've just found themselves in a really bad situation. I've even had that happen to me where you look back and say, how did we get here? How did we end up at this place that now everything seems wrong, right? And usually there were points in time that you could have made different decisions and you
Yeah.
didn't. But I'm not saying that I'm, freaking saint, but I think I'm a decent person,
Well, so,
and
so
I've fallen into that path too.
well, there's multiple things you brought up to communicate maybe more to a Gen Z ADHD pilled brain. Uh,
That's code for my story was too long.
no, that's also code for the attention span of my generation is questionable. No, so like like a good example you mentioned is a good person under the or under particular circumstances, right? You want to separate what happened from the person.
Yes.
There's a very well-known pop culture phrase being spun around. I'm sure you've heard it, which is separate the art from the artist.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Very
that's fair.
similar, I
Yeah.
feel like, almost in regard. And when you talk about things like the perfect person could fail under particular circumstances or
The
whatever.
best of people can make the wrong decisions if
Yeah,
put in a particular place.
situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another phrase similar to that I've heard called everybody has a chink in the armor, right? Everybody
Mm-hmm.
has something, sometime in a very particular circumstance or situation
Mm-hmm.
that it will change how they react
Well,
or act or whatever, you know?
excuse me. And it's so funny that you say that. There's a song. My husband and I love the band Toad the Wet Sprocket. We always have. They were big when we were in high school and college. And there's a song that they sing, and there's a line. They have all these. They are very lyrical. Whoever writes their songs, I know the artist that writes most of their songs. I don't know him personally, but I know who writes them. They're very deep if you stop and you think. I'm sure a lot of artists are like that, but if you've never listened to Toad the Wet Sprocket, you really should. Young kids, but it talks about like growing in the maturity phase, and one of the things that it says is this one phrase is, "I still make the same mistakes." That's true throughout your entire life. You will
Hmm.
still make the same mistakes. Now, sometimes you learn from them and you can start to see that pattern and break it, but people kind of fundamentally are what they are. And sometimes it's those really hard lessons that help you break that chain. But I see that in myself, and I see that in SVPs, so senior vice presidents, chiefs of functions and stuff, who make the same mistake over and over again because we're just human.
Well, and you got to also look at it from the angle of like something I wanted to bring up kind of similarly is there's a lot of people who are like very who are self-aware, like self-awareness, while I think is a very under recognized trait, like a trait that not maybe not under recognized, not as spread as it should be. It should be more common in people, I think. But what I was going to say is there's a lot of people who look at to go back to your everyone makes the same mistakes, right? People who are super self-aware, myself included, who are hardcore perfectionists are like, "Oh, I could fix that. I could change that about myself." There's some things you can't, right?
It's
No
very
matter
difficult. It's very
how
difficult. Yeah.
self-aware you are, how particular you are, it's very, very hard to break certain
Hmm.
things. And something I think a lot of people look at, especially high positions, like you said, SVPs and stuff, people in those positions have such status, such a claim, such
Mm.
titleage. And a lot of people look at them like, well, they must be perfect at
Hmm.
everything they do all the time, 24/7.
Hmm.
It's like, that's just humanly impossible. It's never happening.
Well,
But,
yeah, and on a similar note, this is one of the things I found counseling up and coming leaders on a lot is that every time somebody would make a jump, and if I've said this before in this podcast, we might need to edit this out, but when you move from like an individual contributor to like a supervisor or your first people leader position, and then to a manager, then to a director, then maybe to an executive director or vice president or whatever the ladder is in your particular organization. Usually the behaviors that made you successful in that last job are not the behaviors that are going to make you
Mm-hmm.
successful in the next job. And it's hard to reprogram yourself because you got successful based on that. And so it's like one of the things that I've always said, and my husband has to kind of had to no longer keep me honest for it. My belief was always, there's many times in my career I have found myself overwhelmed that I either didn't have a big enough team, I didn't have the right people on the team. I was always a turnaround person. So I was always taking something that was decimated and trying to fix it as you're running and getting things improved. I'm not really a growth person. I was always a fixer. In fact, I was coded that by one of my chief HR leaders years ago. He said, she's my Olivia Pope. If you've ever seen Scandal, she's my fixer. And I can fix just about anything that's broken. The problem that you have in that is that you fix things by just doing more yourself, working harder, getting it done, and you learn those skills of what to manage and what not to manage. The problem is, and my husband, like I said, would keep me honest here, is I just think, well, I'll just do more myself. I'll just work 20 hours a day. If I work 20 hours a day for the next 3 months, it'll be on track. And for me, that was always successful. That never failed me. The problem was then when I went to the next turnaround, and this is my fear of retiring, I'm not sure that I instilled the leadership and the behaviors and the problem solving that needed to be instilled because my natural inclination, because I'm just always, it's a fire, put it out, it's a fire, put it out, it's a fire, put it out, is that even at the end in my last, let's say 4 months when I knew I was retiring, but maybe not everybody else knew yet, they would come to me with a problem. And instead of doing this for the last 2 years, which I'm not sure I could have done because we were still in a turnaround, but instead of saying, well, what do you think? I would just say, well, here's the answer. And they would go do it. Well, now as you're starting to transition out, you start to worry, well, do they understand why in situation A, that was the answer, but in situation B, that looks really similar, that wasn't the answer. And you don't get there if you don't instill
Mm-hmm.
that experience with others. And unfortunately, I didn't learn it by somebody helping me, by having a mentor. I learned it because I was thrown out in a forest with a knapsack and 2 matches and told, you got to fight your way back, guerrilla warfare out. And I was really good at it. And so I think that's part of that lesson of you've got to separate yourself sometimes and you've
Mm-hmm.
got to realize that in a crisis, and I had one-on-ones with everybody every week, and I would say they bring a problem to me, and it was really tempting to say, do this versus saying, well, how would you fix that? And those last few months, I could see their faces. And they were so totally confused. What do you mean? I'm like, well, what would you do? Well, I don't know. You tell me. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to figure out what you're supposed to do. And I took that as a not so great trait.
You know, going to the topic of you trying to instill some last moment, I guess,
Mm.
of stuff in those leaders before you retired, I want to jump kind of to a different topic. I want to jump to number 5 on our list, which is now that you are retired from full time work, because this is something I'm sure some
Mm.
business people listening might want to know for the future. Um, Full question is now that you're retired from full time work, what will you miss about it and what won't you miss about it? Now, I think the won't might be easier to answer, but what will you
Mm.
miss about it will be interesting, I think, for people in the later stages of their career who might be listening.
Well, it's really interesting. I've watched retirement podcasts for 2 years, probably maybe longer, about, a lot of them are financially. What do you need to do financially, or how do you need to prepare yourself for retirement? And a lot of them have these, like, especially I do watch YouTube, and they have these, like, clickbait lines of, we almost split up, or I wish I hadn't retired, or whatever those little catchy phrases are to try to get you to watch their video. And in those videos, I hear things like, I define myself in terms of my career. And once your title is gone, you don't know who you are, and you have this identity crisis. Or that's where all of my social interactions were. And so once I no longer had that, I no longer had a social agenda. And so those are things that I hear from others. I have to tell you for myself, I don't I don't imagine those are things that I will miss, and here's why. So I will not miss the dinners and the evening activities and all of the things that you have to do when you're at that level, whether it's going out with a chamber person or going to be a speaker or going to, meet the local college president or whatever it is that you had to do. I felt like I lived huge chunks of my time that 3 or 4 nights a week I was having to go out after work for some kind of a work event. Hated it. I'm an introvert, worst possible thing you could ever make me do. I was pretty lucky in this last position that I had that for the last pushing 4 years, I maybe only had to do that a couple of times a quarter. I could have done it more often, but I already knew I wasn't going to, and so I just delegated. So I think that if that's something that you enjoy, you're going to miss it. I will not miss it.
Mm-hmm.
I will also not miss the social interaction that they talk about of, oh, my friends were at work.
Says the introvert.
Well, and being in HR, I could never have friends at work.
Yeah.
Even the people that I like and I will want to be friends with, I have to wait until after I'm done with work. So a number of my team and people on the leadership team ask me for my personal cell phone. And of course I will interact with them. I actually had, one fellow leader who said, why don't we go out to dinner, our spouses? And I always kept my husband separate from work, always, because that was never going to be a good situation. So to me, I was always able to keep it separate, but I think some people can't. So that for me isn't something to miss because I never did it. I will not miss the stress. I will not miss the people issues. We had a lot going on in our business. We were building factories. We had contracts and labor unions and stuff like that. I will not miss any of that. In fact, I was so exhausted from doing that for the majority of my career that I didn't think I was going to have to do it when I took this position. And then when we fell into that, I was like, you've got to freaking be kidding me. This is one of the things I was trying to get away from. So none of that will I miss. I will not miss my drive. I will not miss like the whole dance of, trying to make everybody happy, which is the role of HR. What will I miss? I will probably miss, believe it or not, the structure of my mornings because I get up before anybody else got up. I had my quiet time in the morning. I didn't really have a whole lot of responsibility because my kids are grown. And then I would get to work a good hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours before the office started. And I would have all that time in the morning to plan for my day, make my cup of coffee. Now, again, I wasn't getting there at 8, people. I was getting there at 6.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that mental time alone. And yes, I can kind of get it here, but when I'm in the house and I'm not driving an hour and I'm not alone in the car listening to my podcast or doing whatever it is, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, I will miss all of that because I enjoyed that time. But to be honest with you, there's very little I will miss because I've been exhausted and I've had some minor health issues that have made the commute intolerable. And I've had to do some pain management. And the last year plus of dealing with that changed my perspective on everything. And just eliminating the challenge, the physical challenges that I had have already made an improvement just in a short weeks. I can exercise all day long. I'm not stuck in meetings where I'm having to stand to get out of the pain. And so that's been for me, that was, and quite honestly, that was the biggest motivator to retire is physically. I had to reprioritize what was important.
You talked about it a little bit with me, the idea that you may have gone another 2-3 months if not for that pain situation.
Well, I probably would have gone maybe a year.
Another year.
I may have gone another year because here's my story. When I was a kid, I get married. I'm still a kid. I didn't have my first baby until I was in my 30s.
To be clear, she just married young, not
I
as
did.
a literal kid.
No, I married. Well, I was through grad school and stuff, but I was
They
young.
were high school sweethearts
Yes.
into,
I thought
just
we'd
to be
already told
clear
that
for
story.
everybody.
Yes, I was 23 when we got married, so I wasn't I mean, now
Nowadays,
that's
people get
young.
upset over like 18 and 17
Well,
being in a relationship. So saying kid is
that's true,
just
but you have to realize I
terrifying.
come from a different generation, and my brothers and sisters were all married before they were 20.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So for me being 23, my parents thought there was something wrong with me, especially since I'd been dating my boyfriend for 6 years. Why would you not go ahead and get married? But
Hmm.
anyway, so for me, getting back to the story of now almost forgot what I was talking about. Oh, retirement, my retirement plan.
Yeah.
So when we had our first child, I thought, well, I still want to retire at 55 because that was early. When I was growing up, it was like, oh, to retire at 55 is like beyond the dream because everybody else is retiring at like 62 to 65. So if I could retire at 55, that would be a dream. And that was kind of what my husband and I always planned, that I'm a year older than my husband, but that I would retire at 55 and then he would retire short, at 55 too. So that was always the plan. We had our son, we were on track for that. And then 6 years later, I have my second child. And now I'm like, well, 55 and a half has been shot to hell. I'm never going to be retired at 65 or 60, 55 and a half. So I set my sights on 59 and a half. And I thought, well, because I'm funding my retirement myself, I didn't really have any pensions. The one pension that I did had got bought out. And so everything was being done through really my 401k or savings that we were doing on our own. We were doing brokerage accounts and stuff. And so I was like 59 and a half. That adds 4.5 years. We can still do this. And we were really on track for 59 and a half. And to be honest, when I left the big company that I'd been at over, I mean, pushing almost 13 years, when I left and moved and took not my last job, but the job before, I thought I would retire from that job. And I thought, okay, I'm almost 50. I can do this for 10 years and I'll retire. Well, I did that for about 4 years. And then the job I just left kind of recruited me very aggressively. And it was a wonderful opportunity. And by that point in time, I was getting stock options and equity and stuff. So retirement was going to be a lot more easy. And I, at that point, said, okay, I don't even know if I'll do 59 and a half then, but I could do this for 3 or 4 years. And that's been about my timeline.
Hmm.
And so it is earlier than I thought, but I didn't intend to go to 59 and a half. I kind of wanted to get through one more cycle with our new CEO. This was my fourth CEO in 4 years. So it's a lot. And I kind of wanted to get a whole year in with them, and I didn't quite make it. But at the same time, everything happens in the time it's supposed to happen.
Hmm.
Um, I think that I probably could have moved earlier, but I kept thinking I could manage it. I went to, I went to all kinds of doctors trying to figure out what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And essentially, there's no fix. It's just, this is what,
It just
yep.
happens.
And some people get these things and you just have to deal with that. Doesn't mean I'm not going to try, doesn't mean I'm not going to work on stuff, but, I'm going to enjoy the time that I have left where I'm pretty mobile, and then I won't be able to be mobile,
Hmm.
and that's okay. But retiring at 55 means, instead of having, maybe 2 years, if I retired at 59 and a half, of really being able to get out and travel and be mobile, I will have maybe 7 years of
Hmm.
that. And just not to be grim here, but you also look at family dynamics. I mean, my brothers and sisters are all dying before they hit 70.
Hmm.
And in fact, I have one sister that died at 62. That's only 7 years away from me. So I start to look at that and say, and my parents are gone and things like that. So you say, well, if I've only got 5 to 10 years left, I want to enjoy them. I don't want to work in pain and then retire, and I've just blown all that young time away.
Yeah.
And to you, 55 doesn't seem young, but there's a big difference physically and your health between being 55 and 65.
Yeah, 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 for
And
sure.
so, we're going to do lots of fun stuff together. And my husband's still young. So that's the plan. All right.
Alrighty.
So that was what I'll miss, and there's very little that I'm going to miss.
Uh,
I liked every single person on my team, and I will miss them as individuals, but I will not miss being a people leader.
Alrighty. Well, let's move on to question. Oh no, not number 3. Do you have a question you want to answer here?
I really liked question 2.
Then
And
let's read question 2. Question 2 was actually where I was going to go next anyway. What
Oh,
was
no. I'm sorry. Question 3.
question 3?
It's question 3 that I really liked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to 2 after 3
Yep.
then,
Okay.
because we'll
But
still
I
have
really
time.
do like 3.
But let's do 3. 3 is, what common advice do you think is actually wrong or overrated? And I guess you answer, and then I have an answer technically for
Okay.
this, even though this is directed towards you. But I want to see the difference between how I would view it much younger with
Okay.
an answer and you would. But you go ahead and answer.
Well, here is my answer. And I think it's always kind of bothered me, but in my last few years I had somebody on my team who clearly did this and it was obvious to everybody around them except them. And I don't know how many different times I tried to provide a little bit of advice and I just think it went over their head. And then the last time I just kind of had to hit them between the eyes with it. I started thinking back and I thought, I've heard this a bunch of times in my career. And I always kind of thought it was a tongue in cheek comment. I never really took it seriously, but I think people do. And I think this particular professional who was a director level took it to the extreme, but I think a lot of people do it. And I think it's terrible advice. And I think it will always come back and bite you. And that is the phrase, fake it until you make it.
Mm,
That will always fail you because you don't have the fundamental building blocks that you should have.
mm-hmm.
And everybody knows you're faking it. You don't think they know, and they're not going to call you to your face that you know. But this particular person, every single leader who interacted with this person had some comment about they don't know what they're doing. And it's clear that they don't know what they're doing. And the thing is, they're so stupid, they don't even know they don't know what they're doing. And to me, that would be humiliating to get to that point in my career and have everybody around me saying, yeah, they don't know what they're doing. And I think that it was an interesting mantra when you're early. And I think if you're faking it to the point of saying, I'll figure it out, I'll learn. But when you're just faking it to faking it and your philosophy is nobody knows but me that I'm faking it, you are wrong. Everybody knows that you're faking it. I think it is terrible advice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've ever been told that, or if you're tempted to do that, don't do it. Just say, I don't know how to do that, or I've never done that before. I will go and research and figure it out. Can I come back and just get some advice from you? That will be respected.
I think what I've heard that phrase the most in is when it comes to like prerequisiting for something, right? Like in the context you said of fake it, learn it when you make it. You know, like fake it till you're in the thing, then learn how to actually do the thing, right? How you mentioned briefly.
I think people are forgetting to learn it. They're
I
thinking
think
they can just
I
fake it and fake it
think
and fake it.
well, and here's the thing, right? I always feel that phrases should be taken like this. The faking is setting yourself up to be something. Once you make it, that's why it's fake it till you make it. Until you make it. Then when you make it, learn it.
I don't think
Don't
that's
fake
how
it.
it's exercised.
I don't think it's how it's exercised, but that's how I always read that
That's fair.
phrase. Now that might be because I look at as till as until, like that's the framing of it. And if you just fake it and you never sure you make it, but
Well,
there's an ending to the sentence
and
and
it becomes
phrase, you
that
know?
pattern like I talked about earlier. That's been how they've been successful. And a lot of it is people are just passing them on because they don't want to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the point where, and there's a great term, actually comes out of a whole series of research that's now in by Corns Ferry that was called Lominger. But it's really that concept of um, just basic self-awareness, but also, the ability to be genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in those situations is it's kind of a staller. It's a staller. And like you said, it's a staller. And then when you get there, if you can figure it out, but the problem is you're already on to the next thing that you're faking. And
Mm-hmm.
so you get to the point, it's a Peters principle, right? But you
Mm-hmm.
get to the point where it's now a career ender.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer a staller where people say, okay, well, let them figure it out. It's an ender because everybody around them says they don't know what they're doing, even in this job. And yet they're trying to fake it again for a bigger job. And I think the folks that I've seen, and it's more than one, this one just brought it back with the clarity. It's been dozens of people. They don't even see it anymore
Mm-hmm.
because they've been so successful faking it. They just don't see it. And it's kind of embarrassing to look at them and say, what happened to you that you just think that you can go through life and pretend? You've got to put in the hard hours.
Mhm.
So you had one you wanted to share.
I don't think mine's gonna be nearly as interesting
Oh,
as
okay.
yours,
Sorry.
but I was just gonna go down. I really hate the phrase, and I mean this because I think the phrase is misguided. Not that the token meaning of it's bad, which is the whole um if you not if you follow your passion thing, but there's a thing I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but it's become more common, especially in current day where things like side hustles are very common, for people who even have jobs like doing a side hustle, and it's that um, work hard enough at your passion to make your passion your thing, and the thing part of that being your work, your life, whatever. And I don't. Now, there's enough to be said about the angle of will it even be successful? You know, there's enough to be said for that. That's not the part I really care about here. The part I care about is that so many people don't realize, and this is something I've seen with the uprise of social media being a huge thing, is that people invest so much time, passion, effort into these things like social media or whatever the newest craze or trend is or whatever, um, just to get there and not like doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you focus so hard on your passion, right? And there's an alternative phrase that isn't said as often, which is shouldn't you shouldn't you shouldn't have your hobby as your work. Something
I
like
agree
that.
with that. I don't
You've
think that the
heard
thing that you
something
love
like
to do
that.
should be your income.
I agree. And I think it's very important to separate what you're passionate about in your free time versus what you do professionally, because the difference there is very keen, and if you combine them it blurs and you won't like it anymore. One thing, and this will be a very diverging example, right, but there are people who do, say, reviews for movies or reviews for music or video games or whatever, and I know some of those people who got into that just to end up not liking to do it
Mm-hmm.
anymore, because instead of watching a movie or listening to an album or whatever, just for the fun of it, because it's
Mm-hmm.
entertaining and it's entertainment, it's now become I have to listen to this, I have to dissect it, even if I don't like it. And I think it's something that, especially in the age of common media, you have so many people who are like, oh, YouTube, Twitch, passionate, I'm super into it. And I used to do that when I was younger, right? And I've always said, oh, maybe I'll go back to it one day, where I know I should never go back to it because I won't like doing it long term, because it won't happen, you know? So find other avenues, find different ways to experience that. And that's not to say you can't find something passionately related in a
Mm-hmm.
similar field, right, to the thing you like doing as a hobby that is distant enough that you can still enjoy it and it still be in some way satisfactory like that hobby, but you should not make your exact hobby the exact thing. You know what I mean? I
Mm.
think that that's very important. But let's move on to another question. Probably
Okay.
our last question, just by the time we are running at here. Um, I think we should end, and I'm gonna reframe the question
Okay.
slightly, which is question 6. The exact wording includes the word leader. I'm going to change that to just person,
Okay.
person in business. But let me read the question. The question is, what is the one question you think every person in business should ask themselves every day?
This is going to sound a little bit like a cop out because of how I answered one of the other questions.
Okay.
But I do think, and I did try to do it. The problem is that um, days kind of get away from you. There are some jobs that, you have a very structured schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other jobs that you try to have a structured schedule and things just pop up and you just have to run with it. I would say operations, if you're building or making things that, if you're working on the line, you have a very structured day. But the leaders around the line, all kinds of things pop up and they have to make it fix. They have to fix it. And I think it's probably the same way for HR a lot of your day is unscripted and you just go with whatever popped up for the day. But I learned years ago, my first real professional job out of high school, I was working my way through college. There was something called Franklin Covey. And that was long before you did like any outlooks or any kind of a digital calendar or had anything on your phone for reminders or anything like that. We didn't even really have cell phones. I didn't have a cell phone until I was married. But Franklin Covey taught you to sit down every day, and I think that's why I took that 2 hours every morning and plan out, what do I want to get done for today? What are the things that have to get done today? And then what are the things that I want to get done? And every day you would go back and look at yesterday's and see what needed to be carried over. And so for me, I think that's what you should do. Every day you should start your day by planning and asking yourself the question of what has to get done today and what carried over from yesterday that now yesterday maybe it was a want to do and now it becomes a must do. And I think it's more of a concept than one question, but you should ask yourself, how am I going to spend my time today? What am I going to prioritize? And I think, Franklin Covey, it was hours worth of training, which I don't think anybody really needed, but you would start from several hours in different classes learning how to use their tools or their materials, which were binders and other types of things, to instead, once you got that done, you had the tools, you could just take like 15 minutes. Now, I didn't use the Franklin Covey tools anymore. I used my computer, I used Outlook, but then I had calendars and things that I put on because I wanted to keep track of like people's birthdays and their anniversaries and be able to do things. And so, I had, we called it I always called it a management operating system. But in January of every year, I sat down and made sure all of my reoccurring meetings were up to date. Every week or so, if somebody left the team and joined the team, I made sure my distribution lists were up to date. Made sure I added their birthdays or their calendars or, whatever it is. I made sure that I updated what all my meetings were. If I got ran over by a car or a bus or a train, somebody could open up my stuff and say, oh, here are all of her meetings. There was no need to dig or worry. And so for me, that operating system and sitting down every morning and say, how am I going to spend my day is really critical. So I think it's bigger than just what's one question. I think it's a philosophy of how do I organize my time.
But I do think that's good because it's like even in a position like mine where I don't have a formal position still to this day, it's very it's a very good practice to wake up every day and have a set number of things you want to get accomplished
Yes.
because it instills in you a level of structure that whether you are in a work position, whether you're retired, whether you're in school still,
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly helpful.
It is.
Because it's the same idea as I'm sure everyone, if there's anyone listening, actually, I think our demographics show like we have a 10% under the age of 18 listening audience.
Oh, wow.
But if you're listening and you're in that age group, something to keep in mind is you get agendas, you get
Mm-hmm.
calendars,
Mm-hmm.
you get your Google Classroom reminders, and those are great. But those are meant to teach you good ways of structuring. Those aren't going to be things given to you forever, right?
Correct.
And something to keep in mind, like Jolie just said, is find a way to structure. And it might not be exactly like that. Maybe it isn't. I ask myself every day. Maybe you're a full week ABCD
That's
planner.
correct.
And
Yep.
that's what I do. I'm like, I'm going to do this day, this day, this day. But I think that is a really good answer to that question. I think
But
it's very widely applicable to
yeah,
people.
but the one thing I will say, and I agree with you on that. Some people, I do plan out the entire week. On Monday, I sit down and plan out the entire week.
Hmm.
But you've got to realize that most of the time in a professional setting, your week is going to change on you.
Oh, it will. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you've got to be fairly flexible and understand what you need to reprioritize. And for me, my personal opinion is in systems and processes, whether it's in HR or it's a different type of business, when something fails, it's because you did not have a good operating system.
Hmm.
Something that was the anomaly, the change point, it wasn't caught because you weren't managing the right stuff and it
Yeah.
slipped by you. And so having that discipline. And like you have your own company and you're doing podcasts and you're doing game development, stuff like that. You can be a lot more flexible of how you want to set up your days because you don't have clients or people beating at your door constantly
Yes,
wanting
and that's very
updates.
different. Yeah.
But some people will.
Hmm.
And you've got to be somewhat agile when that pops up and say,
Yeah.
okay. And I think especially, and there are other professions, so I don't mean to keep saying HR, but I'm in HR, right? I was in HR.
This is life in business,
Yeah.
after all.
But what happens is you have I mean, I can't tell you how many times I had to plan for a day and something happened. Not all that long ago. I won't say how long ago, but I literally picked up the phone. One of my, I will call her, my medical officer, called me and said, we have a breakout of tuberculosis. We have highly contagious tuberculosis. It's been confirmed by the Department of Health.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do? Well, I don't know. I've never even known anybody who had tuberculosis. And I said, well, we probably need to get with the health department and figure out what the protocol is. I mean, is this like COVID again? And long story short, it took us about 6 hours to really get it down, but we had to be running while we were figuring out what to do. And did we quarantine people? We had to send people out for testing. And the entire leadership team looks at us and says, well, do you shut down the factory? Well, that's the worst thing to do. We're like, we think we've got it contained, but then who knows what and how do you do stuff? That was an entire day wasted. We ended up figuring out all we needed to do was just test people and tell them they had to wear a mask for a few days until the stuff came back, but you had to test them again and again and again. So long story short, I know a lot about tuberculosis. All I ever knew before was that they pricked your arm to tell you whether or not you had tuberculosis. But, we were like, people died from that. This guy he was like in a quarantine for infectious disease. And he'd been all over the place, eating with people, talking with people, working with people. And you're like, what does that mean? Those things in business, now that's an extreme, but those things in business likes pop up. And for me personally, I was sitting there on that phone going, wow, this is not how I plan to spend my day.
Well, so the story, the moral of that story is, and this is to be extreme, to match your tone here. There is no perfect plan. You will have priorities, and you will have a good way to think about it. I'm not going to use the phrase that came to my head because it's not appropriate, but I always think about it of like ranked choice voting. It's prioritize what you want at the top and then trickle down. And the importance, like you said, is you should prioritize, prepare, and be able to act in a way that can react to sudden calamity.
Well, that's exactly what you're absolutely right. Because if you don't have a good operating system, when that happens, everything else falls apart.
Exactly.
When you've got a good operating system, you say, okay, I'm pulling myself out of the operating system, but everybody else knows what they need to do.
But it's there.
Yeah.
It's there.
It'll maintain
full
itself
circle back
for a
to
day
being
yes.
predictable.
And then you simply say, I'm pulling myself out for a day. I need you guys to manage
you guys
stuff.
to fix this. Move on.
Or you say, I know what I have to get done that I might have to work till 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock tonight because these things I have to do. I can't, nobody else does them. Only I do them. But I know what they are.
Because I know what they are and how much they're going to
Because it's a Tuesday. I know exactly what has to happen on Tuesday. Yeah. So that's my one piece of advice.
And I think that's a great way to end this episode.
Okay.
This has been about 50 minutes, I think. And I think that's a good wrap up for our return. We will be going back to weekly releases on Fridays, same time as it was before, noon or 10 a.m., whatever it was. It was one of those two. But you can expect future episodes. You can expect another 11 episodes of this season. If you enjoy it, please download, share, give us feedback, things of that nature. And we will see you next time for whatever topic we have next
I do think next time we should finish the questions.
You want to finish all the questions?
Yeah.
Maybe we come back halfway through this episode 6.
Because I want to acknowledge that people put time into.
That's true. That's true. We can go through this.
I don't want to ignore. And a couple of them were interesting.
Okay. Well, let's wrap it up for now, and we will see everybody next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.